What started as a technical tweak to a scientific workflow has blown out into a massive legal and political scandal.
Queenslanders want answers, and I want answers.
What we're seeing here, I think, is one of the most serious systemic miscarriages that the Queensland criminal justice system has ever seen.
A commission of inquiry has been holding public hearings into why courts and arguably police were misled about the results of Queensland's DNA forensic testing.
There will be some nervous laboratories all around Australia watching the outcome of this inquiry.
The Queensland Government's forensic laboratory has been under intense scrutiny for most of the past 12 months. First from a forensic expert taking part in the Australian newspaper's podcast series into an unsolved 2013 murder.
And what I've found is quite unbelievable. I've found errors all throughout the DNA profiling process.
And later from the Queensland Police Service, which made its concerns public in a submission to a domestic violence task force.
Nothing short of a full, open and rigorous commission of inquiry can restore confidence in DNA testing in this state.
What's the point you're making here?
The retired judge appointed to oversee this inquiry, Walter Sofronoff, handed down his interim report last month, and it was scathing.
We fear that this initial report could just be the tip of the iceberg.
The report found that in early 2018, the Queensland Forensic Laboratory, under increasing pressure to meet growing demand, made an important change to its testing process. It decided not to automatically carry out the additional steps required to process samples below a certain DNA threshold in major crime investigations. Nadia Bromley is the CEO of Women's Legal Services in Queensland and an advocate for victims of crime. Can you understand the motivation for bringing in these thresholds to begin with?
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of well-meaning people trying to do their job well, and the intention was to improve the turnaround time.
And you have to remember that forensic laboratories are operating in an environment of financial constraint.
Dennis McNevin is a professor of forensic genetics at the University of Technology, Sydney.
With these financial constraints and limited budgets, difficult decisions have to be made as to which samples are taken forward for further analysis.
The problem was this got lost in translation. In some cases where it may have been possible to obtain a DNA profile with additional testing, the courts were simply told no DNA was detected or was insufficient for further processing. Statements the Queensland Commissioner found to be simply untrue. What was your reaction when you read that?
Look, that was very troubling. I was very disturbed to hear that.
I understand the position that Commissioner Sofronoff has taken, and I do see, from a victim's standpoint, that they may feel that they have been denied some justice.
Furthermore, the testing thresholds being used in Queensland were the highest in Australia.
Ultimately, the key thing here is about the administration of justice. These are not scientific documents being created in abstraction. They're being created in relation to really traumatic and horrible things that have happened in people's lives.
And there's a twist to have emerged from the public hearings. Queensland Police agreed to this change in testing back in 2018, and the officer who signed off on an options paper admitted she didn't quite know what she was agreeing to.
To be honest with you, not having a scientific background, reading that paper, I didn't understand it. The options paper has come from people who are experts, and I trusted that advice.
It just astounds me that that was signed off.
Former police inspector and now criminology lecturer Terry Goldsworthy has been closely following the inquiry.
I think it's very problematic for the police as to why they agreed to something they didn't understand, what checks and balances were there. You know, why did it take 5 years for this to come to the fore?
Some police did suspect something was wrong as far back as 2018, and more recently began insisting lower threshold samples be processed. The success rate in getting a DNA profile was higher than they were led to believe.
I had suspicion. I was absolutely of the firm belief now that there was problems, and so I directed my staff to any result that came back from major crime as DIFP, just ask for them to test it.
There's now reports that up to 30% of samples that were disregarded in major crimes may have produced a sample that was useful in evidentiary terms.
And today, another disturbing detail emerged. The public servant, now responsible for overseeing the laboratory, says the cost savings of imposing these testing thresholds were minimal.
Less than $1 million per annum.
Less than $1 million per annum for us to be able to support that level of work. And if we couldn't cover that internally, we would have been in a position to put a budget request through the budget process.
The Queensland Government has stood down 2 forensic lab staff and is now reviewing thousands of cases as the inquiry continues. It's a mixed blessing, raising the hopes of some victims of crime, but also opening old wounds.
This has been happening for a number of years, so a number of these people had thought they had closure, had thought they'd moved on, and years later they're thinking perhaps they didn't.